Pastor, how you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks, Brian. How about yourself?
Good. We're doing a little series on who is Pastor Craig and what's important to him and what has he done and in his own words. So we're going to start at the very beginning. If you can tell me a little bit about when you were a young boy back east and how you first got the feeling that, hey, being a pastor is something I think I'd really want to do.
Okay. Well, let me start a little bit before the sense of call. I grew up in Ohio, a nominally religious family. I mean, we were kind of a church family, but sort of a cultural Christian sort of thing. They went to church because that was the only thing going on, and it was what's so expected in a small town. Um, but didn't have a lot of practice of faith going on in the family. They were believers. But in confirmation, which in the Lutheran tradition is a middle school formation event, so it's a class, ours was quite serious and austere. It was about 5 years of Thursdays and Sundays where we had this very serious curriculum. It was very good, very well done. But in the midst of that, we were asked to write a paper on our faith, and the pastor at the time of that congregation gave some direction about what that question might look like and how you might answer it. And so there was a series of questions unpacking the big question, what is faith and do you have it? And I had never thought about my faith before, but through that process of that questioning and writing that paper for confirmation, I realized that I was utilizing the tools of faith without being very conscious of it. And in that moment really came to faith. So I often joke among Lutherans that I'm the only Lutheran to be converted by confirmation. So that's kind of where it started, and I never in those days considered ministry as a lifestyle. No one in my family had ever been in served as a pastor or been in full-time ministry of any type. Most folks had been Christians, and most folks had been some level of involvement with the church. Some members of my family were very active in the church, and my family was nominally so. My brother, after confirmation, kind of dropped out, like a lot of people. He has now come back to faith and faith life, but like a lot of our students say, he left kind of church for a short period of time after confirmation. But I stayed on, so a combination of friendships, and there was a cute girl who was the pastor's daughter, who I ended up dating. That was a part of my story of kind of sticking with church. God is unashamed to use almost anything in the life of an individual to keep God's love flowing in and through us. And all those friendships, were so critical for my development. We had a young, large youth group that was mostly youth-led, and we didn't have a lot of adult leadership of that, but we had some very on-fire young people that were in high school that just kept building that group, and it was a fabulous experience for us. So I got lucky to stay in faith and then continue to grow that, but it wasn't until college, really, I entertained the idea of that maybe faith would be something that I would be involved with the rest of my life and professionally. So
Where did you go to school?
I went to Heidelberg College, which is in Tiffin. It's now called Heidelberg University. It's in Tiffin, Ohio, small church school. They're in the center of mid part of the state of Ohio, about an hour from where I grew up. And went in as a biology major, wanted to go in and do physical therapy because I was doing a lot of sports and had my own share of sports industry injuries, and had been with a physical therapist to rehab a dislocated elbow. And so kind of fell in love with what he was doing. So when I went to college, I went in with a bio kind of pre-med idea that maybe I'd be a physical therapist. But as time went on, I got more interested in the question of why do people believe the things that they believe, and what power do those beliefs have in the life of an individual? Does it liberate them? Does it enslave them? Does it help them achieve their maximum? Or does it keep them sort of subservient to what their greatest capacity really is? And so it was really kind of a psychology of religion question. So I changed my major midway through college, right at the point at which you really had to declare what you were doing, and picked up psychology and religion, which was more like world religion philosophy in that school. And those would be my end majors. But at first, that's not where I started out. So it was a little dismaying to my family, who thought I was going to go into medical school,
Right.
to suddenly be asking very different questions and talking about philosophy. And my dad, wondering, if I could get a job at McDonald's with a philosophy degree. Uh, that was a little bit of a shocker for them, and again, having no one in our family with that kind of history, they really didn't know the landscape of that. But that's been the question all along for me that's driven it, which is what do people believe, and why do they believe what they believe, and is that source of belief, is the target of that increasing their potential, or is it something that stymies them? That's what turns the crank for me.
Who's your favorite theological or psychological teacher when you're at college?
Oh, in college?
Who provoked your mind the most?
Actually, the professor himself provoked my mind the most. And it was classical studies,
Sure.
We did kind of everybody, Plato and, the normal sort of thing all the way through kind of history, all the different philosophies. But what was interesting about the way in which he led those classes was you had to teach. So in that class we divvied it up, and the students themselves had to teach the class in a seminar style, a setting not unlike the one we're in a library, with a large round table, and everybody had to teach a certain section. Now the professor did some work as well, but it was brilliant way of teaching, because there's nothing better about learning than having to teach something. So it really set my mind on fire around philosophical concepts, and the realization that some of the philosophical things I was thinking about myself, just in my own life, people have been thinking about forever.
Exactly.
And the ancients were struggling with the things that I was struggling with, and I had never really come to a realization that, hey, this is territory that's well-worn path. And so I looked at them as kind of personal instructors and life instructors, and looking around me at the problems in the world, I realized, the stuff that they've been dealing with for thousands of years are things that we're dealing with today. So I don't know if I had one particular philosopher. Later on, it was sort of the hopeful existentialists, which works well with going into faith, like talking like Kierkegaard, some of the writings of Dostoevsky, those folks who were hopeful existentialists. The other end of the existentialists I never really got into. That becomes nihilism.
Immanuel Kant.
Or Nietzsche and Sartre and those guys, that kind of takes that stream of existentialism in a different direction. But I was always on the hopeful end, because I did believe in human potential. So that's the other side of that human beings can live up to their potential for doing good, or they can live up to a different potential. And there's lots of striving for the world in both ways, but there's a superior way, as the Bible says. There's faith, hope, and love. But the more excellent way is the way of love. And so that's a part of what shaped me. And that professor in that philosophy class, English and philosophy professor, was actually a United Church of Christ pastor, which I didn't know until I forged a personal relationship with him. And he became a mentor in me going to seminary and helping me understand even what that meant, because again, my family didn't really know. So Dr. Richard Hostetler is his name, and he just became a great mentor to me and an encourager for me. I'm sure he doesn't know how. I've tried to let him know in the years since then, but he was probably the philosopher who influenced me the most with the philosophies of a number of people. So it's helpful.
We got a lot in common. I was pre-med undergrad at a small Catholic school, and I took 4 courses in philosophy and loved it. Took the required world religions, and it's just I decided to change my major to psychology. So we've got some things deeply in common there.
Yep.
Okay, so when you got out of college, first couple of jobs. Oh, actually, did you go directly to seminary after that?
I did, yeah. As somebody said, I went right to the cemetery.
I was about to say.
Yeah, your little gaff reminded me of that. I was a traditional student, which today is a little more unusual. Today there's a lot more second career types of folks, and there were a number of second career people in seminary at the time when I was there, but I went directly I graduated in June from college and went into seminary that year. I'd been working ministry, because even in the church school I was going to, they were sort of encouraging the work of ministry. It's a church school, so the basis of the welfare of others is kind of at the center of even that institution. Of course, is a higher learning, but church based. So I had worked in outdoor ministry, camping ministry, and for a number of summers as a camp counselor, and then as a leader of different programs at the camp. So I had had some experience with church work in the Lutheran Church. I'd grown up Lutheran, and a little later in the story, that conversion is kind of an interesting one. But I went right into seminary right out of college.
Can you give me a couple of, or one or two experiences in seminary, something that challenged you or something that you really got a lot of joy out of?
Yeah, seminary was an interesting place for me. I did not enjoy the first year of seminary and thought constantly about leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And I have some good friends that were my first year roommate. One of my dear friends, it was my roommate my first year,
Mm-hmm.
and he and I would often come back and use kind of the words of the cry of the cross, my God, what am I doing here?
Right.
But we both stayed, and sort of that community of doubt and angst worked. We stayed together. He's a pastor in ministry today back in Ohio, and so he was a big. All my roommates were always big influences on me, but I felt like a fish out of water. Didn't really know what to expect. A lot of the kids that came into seminary from college, or some of my other classmates, had always known, they were going to be a pastor.
Right.
My great-grandfather was a pastor, and when I was 5 years old, he said, "Oh, you're going to be a pastor too." And from that day on, I knew I wasn't sure, because I was interested not so much in a theological or doctrinal question. I was more interested in kind of practical theology, or the philosophy of religion, or the psychology of religion question, which a lot of people weren't asking. In the setting of the college where I was at, that question was certainly very interesting to the professors. In the seminary, they were much more interested in getting you ready to serve and teach in a particular church with a particular set of doctrines and beliefs. And I was interested in sort of different questions. So I felt like a fish out of water until I got more into ministry types of classes, not so much the theological end, but how we would translate the theology into impacting the lives of others, and some experiential things in what we called ministry in context, which was serving in churches in the community around Columbus, Ohio, where I went to seminary, and then clinical pastoral education course through Ohio State University hospitals, where I served as a chaplain, among other chaplains. And in those settings, those things just it's like the gears finally kind of caught and got traction on each other. So that was the place where I thought, this is it. I've never felt really at peace in some ways with my career, not because it's not a peaceful career, but because the question that drives me isn't always the doctrinal one.
Right.
And sometimes people are looking for doctrinal answers, and I would rather ask the psychology of religion question to them. So that's sort of the short long answer for what did I do right after college.
Oh, I think it's a great point of difference. There's a lot of people that are classically trained, and they have one way of doing things, and you tend to be more of a humanist. You tend to be a little bit more of a rise somebody's spirit up through what they know, and get them to have some grit and not give up. And it's almost you're coaching them in a lot of respects, versus just say, okay, go see some prayers and get back to me. I think it's a very practical way of approaching what you do. So
well, I think that the piece that's been interesting to me is how the ancient practices of the church, and so our videographer grew up as a Roman Catholic, and the practices of the ancient church, even before the Reformation, those ancient practices of mindfulness and centering prayer, and the Ignatian Examen, and praying scripture, Lectio Divina, all of those things, are, to me, really gritty, very practical, very oriented toward how am I going to make this work in my life? How does this integrate into who I am as a human being? So that's the piece that, as I've grown and come further into ministry past the official training period, where I got much more in contact with some of those pieces that it really the traction or the attraction for me to what this job is about for people has been really profound, and I'm grateful for it.
Oh, yeah.
I'm grateful for the whole church and all of our histories, because in particularly the area we live in, that we can cross-pollinate each other. And there's not a sense that I wouldn't look at some Roman Catholic practices because, well, those are Roman Catholic practices. There was a time in the church where that certainly was the case, but I'm so grateful that now we're looking at questions of, what works for the life of the Spirit, and what ways can we adapt these ancient practices to be very useful tools for modern individuals and the kind of stressors that we have in life. So it's a great time to be alive and be in ministry and to be asking the question that I've been asking since college. So
There's also a sense, I think anyway, of less competitive between the sects, between the different types of religious orders, whether it be Catholic or Protestant or Lutheran. We all want people to take Jesus' love into their heart as any way they can reach people to do that.
Well, I think one of the joys of serving in this congregation is that this congregation began in an ecumenical partnership with the United Methodist Church, the Episcopal Church offices met there, and a Reformed Jewish synagogue met all in one building that was owned by the United Methodists in Westlake Village. And it was called Covenant House, and it was about those relationships. And so there's a sort of sense of DNA in this congregation where we would work with one another and cross-pollinate from our traditions. So I've had good friendships with and dear friendships with many of the rabbis at the Reformed Jewish Temple here in town, and of course close friendships with many of the United Methodist pastors that have come through serving in that congregation. And I'm a better person for it. It's certainly different than I probably would have been in another community without that opportunity.
Right.
But I'm very grateful for that, and I'm very grateful for this congregation that invests in that. So we continue to have partnership through our Interfaith Council, talking with folks of different faiths now, which is very different when you get past the Abrahamic families, the people of the book, and having spiritual conversation with other folks beyond that. But even still with doing men's retreats with the United Methodists, sharing some of our services during Lent and Easter with the United Methodist Church and other churches as well. But that sort of thrusts that, we are in this together, and that as people of faith, we share a common language that can often be a source of division, but it does not have to be. It can be a source of great strength and a great unifier. And certainly our local Interfaith Council is one of those places where I really sense that everybody's there for the common good, not for our individual differences or to kind of gain ground on each other, that competitiveness that you talked about, but that we're there together for the common cause of the common good of the community. And that's a great gift.
It truly is. Well, we're going to stop here on this segment.
Okay.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. We really appreciate your experience and your point of view on so many things. Thanks again, Pastor.
Thank you, Brian.